Welcome back. Tonight we are looking back at the life of former Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman, and we're joined now by one of the political reporters who followed him very closely, my old colleague, Rick Hancock. Rick, it is so good to hear from you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Let me ask you first, just kind of an open-ended question here. Just tell us about your experience covering Joe Lieberman back in the day.
Well, Joe was very iconic in a time during the political heyday, I would like to think, of Connecticut. There were a lot of kind of politicians that were nationally known for a little state like Connecticut.
Sure.
In fact, a lot of people thought that Christopher Dodd would be the first one really that would kind of raise up to the national level on the White House side, but it ended up being Joe Lieberman. And actually, one of my very first stories, in fact, my very first story in Connecticut in 1998 involved some of the most iconic political figures, Joe Lieberman, Chris Dodd, and Barbara Kennelly. One longtime congresswoman from Connecticut, the first district, I believe.
So names there, yeah.
Yes, some iconic names in Connecticut history. So my experiences with Senator Lieberman were always fine. I mean, we covered him like any other politician, but he was always very accessible, and that's the thing that I always kind of appreciated working with him. Had tons of on the record and off the record conversations with him. He was always a frequent visitor to the state doing constituent services while he spending time in Washington, D.C. And as I'm sure you've been talking about, he was very, very devout to his religion and so there were a lot of times we couldn't get to him because he was practicing his religion. So that experience was always something that I always remembered him by.
I hate to skip forward this far. There's so much to talk about, but let's skip forward to Nashville when Lieberman ran with Al Gore. He was formally announced as the vice presidential running mate. Talk about that experience.
Yeah, that was amazing. Doug Stewart, my colleague at Fox 61, who was still there, he and I actually covered the Democratic National Convention, the nomination of Joe Lieberman from Al Gore to become his vice presidential candidate, and then we followed that up, obviously, on that very, very long election night that really didn't end in the contested election. But it was just an interesting time. The excitement, the buzz for Senator Lieberman, even his politics, even though he was a Democrat, he leaned more right in a very blue state like Connecticut. But I remember one particular time, if I have a chance to, there was some concern amongst the Congressional Black Caucus at that time because Senator Lieberman's support in some quarters, they didn't believe for affirmative action was as strong as it should be. And Senator Alvin Penn, the late Senator Alvin Penn from Bridgeport, coalesced a whole bunch of folks at a bar and convinced them that Senator Lieberman was the guy who was going to be the help Senator Gore be the standard bearer for the Democratic Party. And so a last minute push that was going to kind of reject Senator Lieberman and becoming the nominee was averted by another well-known former state senator, Alvin Penn. So that was another kind of chaotic time that I do remember.
Do you remember, Rick, what he said? There was so much concern about his leanings, and someone compared him to George W. Bush and said there was so little difference between them. You remember his comment at the time?
I don't remember his comment at the time. Please remind me.
He said it's like suggesting there's no difference between a veterinarian and a taxidermist because both of them will give you your dog back, but that was a good line. I remember being a little surprised at how severe the backlash was for Lieberman. Supporting the Iraq War really led to his leaving the party and becoming an independent. Did you get to interview him at that time, around 2006, I think it was?
Yeah, I sure did, and followed him. If you remember he ran for president himself and didn't do particularly well. And I thought that was the beginning of the end of him leaving the Democratic Party, or as he would say, the Democratic Party left him. So yes, he was very, he took very, very strong practical positions. Step back, he became Al Gore's running mate because of the position he took against former President Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And I think he took a very strong viewpoint that he thought it was immoral, it was a bad thing to do, and publicly on the Senate floor called out the former president, or the president at that time, which kind of actually elevated him to where Al Gore felt like he needed to kind of distance himself from the Clinton White House, and he selected Al Gore. And so what worked for him at that point in 2000 didn't work for him very well when he kind of wanted to go down his own path, where Democrats didn't coalesce around him like they did in 2000.
Sure, and stuck to that independent streak to the very end, forming this no labels organization, beginning to push third-party candidates.
Yeah, and that we'll see if that will ever kind of manifest itself. But he was probably one of the more prominent established politicians that tried to push for independent. It's very difficult. We still have two very strong political parties, the Democratic and Republican Party. So an independent track, it will always be difficult. But someone like a Senator Lieberman probably had as good a chance as any to make some inroads there.
All right. Rick Hancock, our former colleague here at Fox 61. It's so great to hear from you. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Take care. Tell everybody I said hello.